I finally got it.
Everything started to flow.
I felt it in my gut.
It was as though a light went on.
It was a total aha moment.
How do we know what we know? Scientists uncover facts. Nature imparts wisdom. Storytellers weave our shared narrative, while contemplatives seek inner knowing. All that we know is imbued with imagination, and our understanding is ever emerging. Welcome to Knowing, a podcast that explores the synthesis of knowledge, illuminating creativity and insight.
Hello, friends. I'm Wendy Tremaine, and I'm here with my favorite co-host. Hello, Rob Stroop.
Hi, Wendy.
Rob, we chose the theme of connection for today's show because connection is really a defining feature of our species. You could look at the evolution of our species as a series of efforts to connect to one another. Our drive for connection has shaped and is shaped by our culture, politics, and economy. Our featured interview today is with media theorist, writer, author, lecturer, and graphic novelist Doug Rushkoff. Doug's going to walk us through the efforts we've made to connect over the course of time, from the advent of written language to media and technologies of our day, revealing both our drive to connect and what thwarts our efforts at achieving our goal.
But first, let's back up a minute and take some time to contextualize this theme of connection.
Fun fact, of the mammalian family, we have less facial hair than many other mammals, in part because we developed 43 facial muscles for the purpose of communicating, for the purpose of connecting.
Wow, we're so drawn to faces. That's why we like to imagine them as well, which shows our need to understand and connect with others. Wendy, one of my favorite pastimes is laying in the grass when I was a kid, but I do it as an adult, and watching the clouds blow by.
I've seen you do it.
Yes, because I see all sorts of things in them, but I have to say the images that come forward the most for me are faces, and there's a name for this. It's called pareidolia, the phenomenon of seeing faces in everyday objects. You know, like seeing Jesus in the pancake.
Yeah, we do see Jesus all over the place, don't we? Well, you know, I studied advertising, and in school, we learned that the reason we see these giant portraits in glossy magazines is because advertisers know that we are super drawn to faces.
Well, two of the obvious ways that we connect as humans are language and physical connection. About physical connection, there was a Romanian study of infant orphans, a rather famous study, at a time in Romania when resources were limited. So they divided up between the babies that would receive physical connection and touch and those that wouldn't. And the ones that had human touch and connection withheld experienced serious health fallout, including stunted growth in the brain and body, as well as reduced cognitive and emotional development.
No joke.
Yeah.
I found a diabolical study. It was a language deprivation experiment conducted by a German king, Frederick II, during the 13th century. So he instructed nurses and foster mothers to care for infants without speaking to them. They did not survive to discover what they would naturally speak. They wanted to see if they would naturally speak the language of their parents, but they didn't make it.
Wow.
I know. But, you know, let's talk about love.
Okay.
So, yeah, the desire for connection for the purpose of love, I mean, this is expressed more than anything. We hear it in songs and in poetry. So for our show, I grabbed one of our favorite Rilke quotes. Do you want to share that?
Yeah, Rilke said in his book, Letters to a Young Poet, he says, "I hold this to be the highest task of a bond between two people, that each should stand guard over the solitude of the other. For if it lies in the nature of indifference and of the crowd to recognize the solitude, then love and friendship are there for the purpose of continually providing the opportunity for solitude, and these are the true shadings which rhythmically interrupt periods of deep isolation.
Whoa, Rilke. So that is so beautiful to me because, in a way, Rilke is pointing to the edge of connection, which right after the edge is like solitude and more frightening isolation. But he distinguishes them. And for me, that quote is honoring the connection that delivers us to the chasm, the gap between people, because we will always be separate from one another. But we can stand over that solitude of the other like a loving guard to disrupt, as he said, interrupt periods of deep isolation.
Mm-hmm.
Oh my.
Yeah.
So, solitude and isolation, different. Solitude, what do you think of? I mean, I think of like beautiful. Solitude is beautiful.
Yeah, solitude can be embraced and it can even be healthy. But I think isolation leads to loneliness.
Mm-hmm. Well, mystics also speak to this, to connection. And many mystics call the impulse that drives us to connect love. We also have a clip for you from a previous episode on the subject of desire. Guyon Mocker speaks to how the desire to connect expresses itself throughout the universe. Let's hear that clip.
When you think of that word love, I mean, what a mysterious word. And it's all the pull toward unity. We can see that everywhere we turn. And the cosmos wants to move closer. The human being is always acting that out, that desire. And we call that love. The pull to be drawn closer together, to overcome our separateness. In a personal sense, is what you might call the pull of evolution.
Before hearing Guyon explain it in this way, I never thought of love being an evolutionary force in the universe. I guess I just thought of it as a human emotion. Maybe it's both. During the pandemic, we all experienced extreme disconnection from each other on a global scale. Meanwhile, we had technologies advancing rapidly, but the pandemic accelerated our adoption of these technologies. I mean, think of Zoom, like Facebook Messenger, telehealth, online counseling, and of course, social media.
Yep. I started online counseling during the pandemic.
Yeah, myself as well. Often we think of elderly folks as having a bit more distance, from the latest technologies.
Oh, yeah.
You tell a grandma that she can't see her grandchild and she'll have that technology figured out lickety-split.
Yeah, right. My dad calls YouTube the YouTube. But but you're right. Like grandma wants to see her grandchild. Suddenly I could figure Zoom out in like 5 seconds.
Yeah.
Well, oddly though, right? So we've never before had such sophisticated tools for connecting. And yet today, loneliness is at an all-time high. And today's interview with Doug Rushkoff will give us some insights as to why.
And everything we've talked to up to this point leads us to this, that connection is not only a desire, it's a need.
It is. Well, so today in our main interview, you'll hear from Doug Rushkoff, and he's going to share what may be new phrasings to you. And they help us to narrate the story of our attempts to connect in a digital landscape. Words like techno-solutionist, social currency, digital capitalist, technocracy, just to name a few.
In Wendy's interview with Doug, he shares his perspective about what he calls the human difference. He gives us a clear view of the forces at play in the media sphere, helping us to understand how digital life is an extension of our evolutionary goal of connection, and points out why technology has failed us in meeting that goal.
Doug also shines a light on the idea that what's of greatest value is something tech does not possess, our humanity, which he calls the human difference. MIT has named Doug Rushkoff one of the world's 10 most influential intellectuals. Doug's a media theorist, professor, and author of more than 10 books on media and technology, including Program or Be Programmed and Life Inc. Doug's also a professor of media theory and digital economics at City University of New York at Queens. In our interview on today's show, we discuss connection by talking about two of his most recent books, Survival of the Richest, Escape Fantasies of the Tech Billionaires, and Team Human.
Strap in, listeners, because this is an excellent interview.
Thank you, Rob.
We will also hear from our Knowing Show science teacher, Minna Lebitz, as she shares the biochemistry that Doug touches on, which takes place when we experience authentic connection and when we don't. We will also hear from choreographer and American Sign Language artist and interpreter Brandon Crazen Maddox, who shares a unique view of language which includes empathy and communication through the body that could increase our chances for the things that humans want most, each other.
Isn't it so true? All right, Rob, let's get this show started. Here's my interview with Doug Rushkoff. Welcome to the Knowing Podcast, Doug Rushkoff.
Hey.
Doug, the last time we saw each other, you had just returned from I'm doing air quotes, speaking engagement, which seemed to be what set in motion the writings of one of your books, The Survival of the Richest, Escape Fantasies of the Tech Billionaires. And in that book, you introduce a concept that you coined, the insulation equation. It speaks to something that I was pulling out of both that book and the next, Team Human, which is an evolutionary thrust to connect and collaborate, and the continual thwarting of that effort and resulting loneliness and isolation, even for the tech billionaires. So can you start us out with first an explanation of the insulation equation and address the notion that the thwarting of our efforts to connect has been by design?
The extreme isolation and antisocial behaviors and mindset of the tech elite have rendered a landscape that makes it really difficult for people to connect with each other in any real way. Because if you're actually connecting with a person in a real way, it's very hard to monetize that. Where as long as you need to connect through a product or some medium or some intermediary, then the bad guys make money or someone makes money. But you end up generally less connected. And if people have the ability to connect with each other, well, then why would they spend money on ways to connect? They would just connect. I mean, cuddling is free. And that's a big problem for those who want to make money off humans.
Cuddling.
Exactly. So the insulation equation is really kind of the end state of extractive capitalism. It's this idea that I realized that these rich tech billionaires building bunkers and uploading their consciousness to computers or trying to raise money for Mars missions so they could get off the planet before it collapses, that these guys believed that there was a way to make enough money to insulate themselves from the reality they were creating by earning money in that way. So it's like, I can build a car that could go fast enough to escape from its own exhaust. And it works for a while, as long as you can kind of keep moving west and keep enslaving more people and getting more resources out of the ground and whatever, it can kind of work. But what they realized by the 21st century is that there's kind of a fixed amount of land and air and stuff on this planet. So things are getting dicey. The economy could crash, the masses could rise up, global warming could turn out to be real. There could be pandemics and nuclear war and all sorts of zombie invasions and different things. So the object of the game for the ultra wealthy is to sort of game that out. How much money do I need? How much technology do I need to insulate myself from all of the collateral damage I am creating myself by building server farms and sending kids into mines in Africa to get the rare earth metals for my AI or my Tesla? That at some point you realize those sort of karmic returns are going to be cashed by the world on you. So how high up is my tower to protect me? As I started writing that book, Survival of the Richest, I was trying to sort of poke holes in their logic to show there is no escape. You're here with us. Mars is inhospitable. Even a post-nuclear Earth is more hospitable than Mars. not going to work. You guys are crazy. But the more I looked into it and really talked with these people, the more I realized this was not a fear-based fantasy, but a wish-based fantasy. That this is more like, the Little Rascals, the Spanky and Alfalfa and these guys, they would like make a little clubhouse and would say, no girls allowed. That's the fantasy. It's not that they're afraid of a situation arising where they have to go into a bunker in the middle of nowhere and play with virtual reality for the rest of their lives. That's what they want. That's the kind of the tech bro fantasy, is that you get to be alone in your little robot plantation, with nobody there. It's dark, but once you realize that's been the vision since the Media Lab at MIT was started. When you look at Stuart Brand's book about Nicholas Negroponte and the Media Lab, you see that, these are little boys trying to recreate the womb. They want to, isolate themselves, dematerialize and be in a perfect little robot world with no women and water and nature and all of that complicated, moony, woodsy.
No messy stuff.
Yeah, that messy stuff that makes life real. It's interesting because some of the, a lot of the tech bros are West Coast, and they've kind of incorporated some of the techno hippie utopian idea. Like, we're going to go off and create a seasteading community where we can all smoke pot and do acid and have free love and libertarianism, whatever it is that they want to do out on their thing. But like you say, they're extracted and insulated from reality, and that's the problem. But the joy, that's with Team Human, what I kept arguing. I've been arguing this since the 90s. We all make it or none of us make it. We can't detach from the world.
Let's swing this into the intentional thwarting of this goal of connectivity and intimacy. In particular, I wanted to lean into something you, I think, wrote about in Team Human, which is the idea that always, going back to the pharaohs, going through our lineage of religion and into media up to this modern day, there's always been a ruling class that's a media ahead of the rest.
I was looking for a kind of a camp of media theorists who saw what was happening the way that I do, because it's like we're making this big transition from whatever, this electronic television world to the digital one. And everybody's getting so, freaked out. Who talked about this? And I was ultimately look back at the ancient Jews who were trying to kind of shepherd civilization from an oral society to a written society, to a scriptural one. It's like, okay, we can write things down. What do we do? Let's make a contract with God, a covenant. What do we do? Let's write laws, right? That people can follow or not. Let's write down our story. And how is that going to look? What's that going to be? What is honesty in a world of text? What is history? What is memory? It's like, what's going to happen? And they were really looking at that. How do you bring ethics into a written world, which they were really scared about, because ethics always depended on look in my eyes and tell me face to face was the way you created ethics, because it was hard to fuck someone over when they're right there in your community. We're going to go long distance. What's going to happen? So I started to look at kind of the big, broad stroke history of media and thought back to, okay, way back when there was no writing or anything, and people just did what they were told. And the Pharaoh, who was in charge of everything in ancient Egypt, they could hear the word of God, was the idea. And then everybody else just had to follow. But he was the only one who heard it. So then you get Judaism and you get the written word. It's like, so now everybody's going to be able to read, right? Now that we got Torah, we got this stuff. It's like, no. The people could not read. What they would do is gather twice a week, and the rabbi, the elite, would read Torah to them. Right? So what did people get? People got the skill of the Pharaoh. Now people could hear the word of God, which was what the elite had the last time out. But the new elite, they could actually really read what was there and select what gets read to the people and what doesn't. come another 2,000 years forward, we get the printing press. We got the printing press. So, what did people get? Did people get the ability to write books? No, that was tightly controlled. What people got with the printing press was the ability to read. And especially it was really mostly wealthy-ish people, but people got reading. So now we got our own Bibles. We could read the Bible. So what did we get 2,000 years later? We got the ability that the rabbis had in the scriptural age, but the elite got the ability to print the books that they printed. If you operated an unauthorized printing press, they would kill you. They would smash it and kill you. Only it had to be king authorized. So people got the ability to read. They got the last one, and the elite got the new one. Now, come all the way forward to computers. What did people get? People got the ability, the regular people, of writing. So now anybody can blog. Anybody can go on a Substack and print their thing. But the elite are programming this reality in which that happens. So the elite are building the platforms on which all this stuff happens and using it for surveillance and every other thing. And, AI prediction algorithms of your behavior based on what you've read or what you've written. Let them eat blog. Nobody is threatened by any of our Substacks, because everybody's doing it because it's now this mass thing. But the elite has programming. That's why I ended up writing that book, Program or Be Programmed, back in 2010, that's coming out again now, because it was like, if you don't really understand programming, you don't understand the world that we're living in, because we are living in an essentially programmed world. This is a world teeming with algorithms and AIs and different things that are monitoring and altering your behaviors. So it was sort of disappointing for me to see that we're always kind of one renaissance behind what's actually happening. And each of these renaissances, it feels to me like there are opportunities to catch up, but it seems that most people don't actually want to. This is why I'm a okay selling author, but not a best-selling author. You're mentioning it before, this idea of the Pareto principle. That on any platform, YouTube or Substack or anything, 80% of people are just going to read it, and 20% of people are interested in actually, well, how can I say something or do something, or not just play a game, but make a game? Once you accept that, it's like, okay, I've been kind of silly in my effort. And every single one of my books, even my comic books, end with like a character trying to hand the pencil to the reader saying, okay, you take it, pass the baton, you write. Not everybody wants to write. Not everybody wants to create. Some people just want to live their lives. And that's okay too.
There's a phrase I heard to this effect, which is, ignorance is a shield for that which one is not yet ready to face. And it's a kind of soft sentiment that turns like the annoyance or the struggle we may feel toward ignorance to like, not everybody's ready to take the burden of waking up and carrying this heavy load of how things actually are, and then have a voice, and then have a responsibility to that voice. It's a huge load.
And it's why it fails. It's why Occupy failed, or the US Constitution, because these are traditions that are saying each generation needs to understand what's going on and write this for themselves, renegotiate their relationship to God, to each other, to government.
To democracy, yeah.
To democracy. And people are like, no. Tell me who the bad guy is.
And I'll hit the right button.
Right.
This kind of ties us into another metaphor that you write about in Team Human of figuring ground. So we have this idea that we're being thwarted, but then there's this weird nuance on how that actually happens. I mean, here we are essentially still the creators who push forward into these new ways of having voice and ways of connecting. We're still that human impulse behind it all. And yet somehow there's like this commingling of weirdness, and the ground and the figure get swapped. Our intention becomes our trap. So I'll let you speak to that, but can you share first, and maybe in broad terms, what this idea of figuring ground is, and maybe get into a couple of examples?
There's no, psychology concept. That famous picture where there's like, you could see it either as like a goblet or two faces looking at each other.
Oh, yeah.
And it's what's the object there? Well, it's a picture of a cup. Americans are very subject, object, figure oriented. We live in a world of nouns. And our little kids even say, what's that? What's this? What's that? So when you name all these different things, that's a cat, that's a chair, that's a cloud, you start thinking of the world as these figures, as these things. Interestingly, in the East, and it might be because of their more pictorial form of writing, there's a lot of reasons why. If you show a person in the West a picture of a cow in a pasture and say, what is this? They'll say it's a picture of a cow. Show that same picture to people in the East and they'll say, oh, it's a pasture. And if you ask them later, what was it a picture of? The Western person will say a picture of a cow. Where was it? I don't know, green maybe? And you ask the person in the East and say, oh, it's a picture of a pasture. Well, what animal was there? I don't remember. They won't even remember necessarily what animal was there. So it's not that one is better or worse. It's just different, right? So in the West, we are object-oriented, subject-object. It's very capitalist in its way. This is acting on that. It's very mechanical. It's very industrial. It's very utilitarian. There's the figure. And we often miss the ground. So this is like what McLuhan, the great media theorist, was trying to talk about when he was saying the medium is the message. It's like you're watching television and you think the content of your program is what's happening to you. And he's like, no. Watching television is what's happening to you. And that's a whole different thing. And that the medium of television is good for certain things and bad at other things. It has certain kinds of biases. So when Americans have decades of watching TV, we ended up, to make a long story short, in a very globalist understanding of reality. Television was globalist. One world, it was simultaneous, it was live. We watched the moon landing together. We watched the Olympics together. The pinnacle of television for me was Ronald Reagan standing in front of the Berlin Wall saying, Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall. Our television president saying, we live in one world. Oprah Winfrey, everybody holding their hands around this planet, big blue marble. That was the happy kumbaya side of it. The bad side of it was global markets and globalism and global corporations and all that kind of stuff. You get the internet age and you have very different biases. The internet is not about globalism. It's not about tear down this wall. The internet is about everything being discrete. Are you a 1 or a 0? Are you this? Are you that? So as a ground, the internet engenders different ways of seeing the world. You don't get Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall. You get, let's build a wall between us and them. It's different. So if you don't recognize the ground, you are kind of stuck just looking at the figures. We reverse it all the time. You become conscious of it in those weird moments. Like I wrote a whole book about it called Life Inc., which looked at the process by which corporations attained the rights of people, and then human beings attempted to become corporations. Brand you, and that's everybody as an independent contractor. It's like, whoa, when did that reversal happen? So now politicians are supported by corporations and human beings barely vote. What's happened here? It's a reversal of figure and ground. And that's why I want people to understand reality as programmable, that so much of the world that we look at, we accept as given circumstances, but they're not. We're living on landscapes that were designed by people who've long since left the building for purposes that have nothing to do with helping us live well together.
Yeah.
And what we're talking about is ground, that there's a sort of an atmospheric change that's making it hard to think and to conceive and to metabolize. I almost want to cry when I'm saying it. To metabolize our collective trauma.
Yeah, it is a trauma.
We are so traumatized. And we're trying to have machines metabolize the trauma for us, and they can't. An AI could be an obstetrician and get the baby out, but an AI can't be a birth doula. Because the doula is doing something else. The AI can't be a death doula either, right? The AI can't offer its nervous system to you to help you metabolize the transition. We can only do that for each other.
This reminds me of something you bring forward in the book too about mirror neurons and oxytocin and the trick being played when technology tries to present itself as our friend or our emotional companion. I thought it was particularly interesting how it instead creates distrust because there's this subtlety where we're like, this is not correct.
Right.
We know it.
Exactly. If you have a Zoom call with somebody and they say, I agree with you, great idea, good. You hear it logically, but you can't see their pupils getting all of the sort of painstakingly evolved mechanisms for relating socially are thwarted in the medium. I mean, I can see as we talk, we've got the video on, I can see the micro motions of your head doing little yeses in there.
Mm-hmm. I'm smiling at you.
Yeah, and smiling. So my mirror neurons get some of that, but part of me doesn't. I can't see if your breathing is syncing to mine. I can't quite tell if your skin is flushing and all, whatever the ways are that my body knows, they're not there. So when we hang up, my body says, she says she agreed with me, but my body doesn't have all the sensations of agreement. She's probably lying. And so it actually creates distrust rather than trust. And or at least cognitive dissonance, or I walk around unfulfilled or unagreed with. No wonder we're like this.
While we're in this particular field, something came up for me, which is this idea that was really heavy in my heart about how technology auto-tunes or pitch corrects, like the human soul. Can you share a little bit of that landscape?
Yeah. It's interesting. Talk about, the fascist aesthetic. So take a technology like auto-tuning. Auto-tuning is of the digital realm. Everything digital is quantized. Everything is perfect. It's like a snap to grid of reality. You're here or you're there. Everything lines up perfectly. So we've got auto-tuning. And I understand if you want to take an Ariana Grande recording and you've got her voice and she's a commercial product, if she's slightly off that 440 hertz A, and you've got a computer, you could bring her right perfectly on it. Go for it. You're going to do it. So make her note perfect, to make her better. And on every scale that we have, singing more exactly on the note means better.
And predictable. It fulfills a prediction that we have of what it should be.
What it should be.
Yeah.
But imagine auto-tuning James Brown. So James Brown, where he's reaching up for that note, right? Or Tina Turner coming down, what's love? She kind of comes down sharp over the note, down onto the note.
The Rolling Stones. I mean, we can go on and on. Yeah.
Right. What makes it special is that offness. So if you auto-tune James Brown, what you are doing is you are quite literally cleaving the soul from the music. Again, it's a reversal of figure and ground. The technologist will say the singer being off the note, that's called noise. And we're going to turn that noise into signal by making them exactly right on the note. And I would say, no, the fact is the signal that I get of the other human being on the other end is not the way they hit the note. It's the way they don't hit the note. It's where do they vary off the note. So if we auto-tune James Brown, we are killing the soul, whether you believe in the human soul or not. You're certainly killing what we call the soul of the music. But I would argue that that's the human difference. It's that place. It's interesting when they want to make an AI sound more human or an AI writing look more real, they add errors to it.
They add the mistakes.
They add mistakes. They add randomness. But it's not mistakes.
No, it's humanity.
It's actually signal. It's the way that I connect with Van Gogh through history is I don't want an AI Van Gogh painting because it's not about what it's doing to my retina. It's about me connecting with Van Gogh over those centuries. What was this tortured person? What were those haystacks? What is he doing?
Is this applicable to the Pareto principle when we look at the 20% and what that 20% can represent for humanity and this idea of pitch control? I think in the book you use algorithms as the way that the 20% are at risk of being auto-tuned to the 80.
Facebook's value is its ability to predict our behavior. That's what they do. And they are about, again, 80% accurate. So they will know with 80% accuracy by looking at what you've clicked on that, oh, Wendy's probably going to go on a diet in a month. The problem is they're only 80% accurate. So with 80% accuracy, they'll know that you're going to go on a diet next month. Once they know that, your news feed starts to get filled with ads from diet companies. And, oh, look at this is what it looks like in your veins when you eat too much fat, or, oh, are you skinny enough or this or that? They're not doing that just to sell you the products that are in those ads. They are doing that to try to make sure that you behave consistently with your statistical profile. They want to get that 80% accuracy up to 90%. So what that means is taking that 20% of people who are going to do something else, who are not going to go on a diet, or realize that they're fine just the way they are, and they're stop seeing themselves as overweight, or stop trying to be skinny for this boyfriend that's a fucking asshole anyway. They want to get that 20% to behave, to be predictable, so they can say, we have 90% accuracy or 95% accuracy. But what are they doing is shaving the weird off the population. And that's the saddest part of all this.
I was really taken by what you wrote about Darwinian evolution. I think what was appealing to me was the way we write and shape narratives. And we're the authors of those narratives, but we just kind of accept so many of them and live in them, like our Darwinian evolution, survival of the fittest. So can you share your different view of Darwinian evolution?
Darwin was not writing about competition. Darwin was actually writing about cooperation and collaboration. That if you actually read Origin of the Species, it's not the story of survival of the fittest. There's like one paragraph about that. What he's really looking at page after page is how species adapt to cooperate and collaborate with each other. That nature is this one giant collaborative organism. So when I was in middle school, I was taught that trees compete for sunlight. And the big tree shades the little tree and the little tree dies. And it turns out that's not the case at all, that the big tree actually shares its nutrients through the soil with the little tree during the summer through a network of mycelia that take a little service charge for the transaction. And then when the big tree, the deciduous tree, loses its leaves in the winter, the little evergreen tree then shares nutrients back with the big tree through the same system. So wait a minute. So they're not competing, they're collaborating, they're ensuring mutual survival. Then you look at Darwin and you see, oh, that's what he's writing about, page after page after page. Of course, the way Darwin gets interpreted in a capitalist society is this is a jungle out there and it's survival of the fittest individual and all that. Let's take that back. It's a jungle out there. Let's go to the jungle and see what that looks like. Oh, what is the rainforest like? What is a coral reef like? It's this intricate web of interdependencies and balances and negotiations. Yeah, there's some rough stuff going on, but there's a hell of a lot more cooperation than there is competition.
This is like a little bit of a paraphrase, but it's speaking to what we're talking about. In one of your books, you talked about socially fulfilled people needing less money, experiencing less shame, behaving less predictably, acting more autonomously. How might that, given what we just shared, undermine this system of exploitation?
When my daughter graduated high school, we got this portrait from the school, from the yearbook. We got to put it up on the wall. And I realized I don't have a drill. So like any American, what do you do when you need a drill?
You go to like Home Depot.
Go to the Home Depot. Right. Get a minimum viable product drill, get the rechargeable one maybe because you think it's going to whatever. Use it once, stick it in the garage, and either never use it again, or by the time you get it out of the garage, it won't recharge and you're going to throw it out. So what have I done? In addition to spending, $79.95 and having sent African children into a rare earth metal mine to get the cobalt and molybdenum and whatever to make the rechargeable battery for this thing, and made all the carbon pollution to make this thing, then used it and thrown it out. What I could have done was, walk down the street and knocked on my neighbor Bob's door and said, Bob, can I borrow your drill? because Bob's always there. He's got his machine work. His garage is always open. He's got routers and all that. And Bob, if I go to Bob's house and ask, Bob, can I borrow your drill? He's not only going to let me borrow his drill, he's going to come over and he's going to, Doug, you're a fucking nerd. You don't know how to find a stud. You're not going to do it right. He's going to come with a drill and an anchor and a thingy and a who's-its and do it for me with a plug in the wall drill like God intended. But then what? Then it's like, I'm going to have a barbecue the next weekend. Bob's going to be in his driveway, routing his doors or whatever it is that he's doing there. He's going to smell my barbecue and think, yeah, I just drilled a hole for Doug. He should. So then, all right, so I'm going to invite Bob over for the barbecue now. So now Bob's going to be at my house, maybe with his wife. And then he's going to say to his kids, like in doing algebra, and he knows I'm a nerd. Can I help her with the algebra thing before the regents? And then the other neighbors are going to, why has he got Bob coming over to his house and not us? Before long, the whole block's going to want to have a party and hang out together and owe each other favors. And that's the nightmare. And that's the scary part, right? That's a nightmare, is this utopian vision of a block of people that do stuff and barbecue and hang out. You don't need to drive somewhere else for friends because your friends live on your block and they can help you with stuff and you can help them.
And that is the nightmare to the technology that we have immersed ourselves in. That's the nightmare to our economy.
Right. Because I brought this up in a talk. And every time I do bring it up in a talk, someone gets up and says, well, all right, so everybody's going to start borrowing drills and lawnmowers and everything from each other. What happens to the drill company?
I guess I have two questions about this. One is degrowth, right?
Yeah.
So is degrowth a way forward? But really on the heels of that, and maybe even with more emphasis, is proponents of capitalism argue that the free market and the possibility of huge financial rewards is the driver of innovation. So what do we say to that? Can we innovate and thrive without this economic monster on our back? Where's the drill company?
Well, sure, there's other ways of motivating things. And what we do know is when you motivate something like healthcare with a market, if you find something like psilocybin, there's no market incentive for psilocybin because it's not a patentable chemical.
It's like lithium. It's on the periodic table. Who cares?
Who cares? So you end up with guys like Peter Thiel trying to develop analogs of psilocybin that can be patented. And then you do all the research and safety protocols on that so you can sell a patentable chemical to the masses for money. Or curing a disease is even a big problem for medicine.
Sure. What will we do with all these cancer centers? I mean, we were invested.
Right. Renewable energy is a problem for the oil industry. We cannot, nor should we, spend this much energy all the time. We've created these energy consumptive lifestyles to support a market.
It's figure ground.
Right. The reason you need a car to get to work is because GM lobbied and changed the landscape of America so that you would live driving distance away from where you worked. The market can help gamify innovation and development at certain stages of an economy's development.
Yeah.
And it's an interesting game to use for it. But at other levels, once you reach the place where America is at, it's no longer the best way to gamify it.
Yeah. What I'm hearing, if I'm reading you correctly, is like there's a recipe here. And I often feel like one of our systemic problems is we don't recognize when a tool we used reaches its expiration mark and we just try to hang on to it way after it provided the thing we actually wanted from it.
Mm-hmm.
It's that we don't know when to throw it away.
We can't.
And we just keep resuscitating. We can't let go.
Neil Postman wrote about this in Technopoly. I mean, he was writing about it for technology, but you can use it for money or any system, any institution. That first you have a technology because it solves a problem. Then you start rebuilding the world around the needs of that technology until you end up in a world where removing the technology is impossible because the whole world has been built around its needs. So it's like, okay, the car was a good idea for getting from this place to that, but then we kind of remade America around the needs of the automobile.
Right. And the fossil fuel to feed
Right.
it. And
you get wars and stuff, the Middle East and all that stuff. It's oil and wow, all because of the car.
let's take the minutes we have left to spin maybe a more positive view. I love the way you present weirdness as the resistance. And similarly, another topic I'm fond of is awe, right? So let's talk a little bit about if weirdness is our way of hacking the very systems we created by throwing a little chaos in there and resistance.
When I look at the world and the state that we're in, economically, globally, politically, I start to think that our best chance of turning the corner is magic. Which is a weird thing to say, but I'm pinning my best hope on magic being real. And by magic being real, I don't mean pulling a rabbit out of one's hat, Penn and Teller magic, but the magic of global mind shift, of a fundamental reframing of our experience of reality. And that if we were able to engender such a shift on a global scale, like a global aha, or oh, dude, or I'm sorry, or whatever that is. And I do think that awe is a gateway to that. It feels like just as socializing and social contact has been systematically removed from the modern experience, I feel like awe has been replaced with kind of uncanny valley. So the equivalent of awe now is, oh, look at what this AI did. Doesn't it look like something? And it's more like a feeling of like Google Earth vertigo. That's not awe. That's like gee whiz.
That's ish.
Ish, yeah. Or like, here, put on these virtual reality goggles and whoa, what was that? That's ish.
That's not awe.
It's not awe. Awe is look into the puppy's eyes. Look at this baby. Look at this coral reef. Look at the sky.
You're describing presence, in a Sufi mystical, language. Presence is best found by just noticing what's arising.
Right.
It'll always take you to what is living and presence.
Right. It's back to the Torah. When Moses, what's your name, God? What is your name? And God says, I am what I'm becoming. Basically, when people interpreted it as I am what I am, Popeye, but it's really more exactly, it's that I am what I'm becoming. So it's what you're saying. It's, are you there at the unfolding of reality?
Catching that moment. Yeah.
Right. And that is an experience of awe. And you could do it, an ecstatic dance at a rave. You can make love. You can look at a thing. There's a lot of ways to experience that awe. And when you do have an experience of awe, now we have all the science behind it. Your immune system is more balanced. You're going to be more generous for like 3 days later. Your cytokine response changes. All this stuff is different about you when you've had experiences of awe. And it's directly opposite to when you have experiences of great wealth. Billionaires, their mirror neurons don't function. You throw a billionaire in an MRI machine and show them a picture of a starving baby, and the part of their brain that's supposed to light up of empathy or compassion, it doesn't even happen. You don't know. Is it the money that did it or the things that they had to do to make that money force them to turn off certain receptors in order to move through a world where they're aware of the externalities of their actions, and they can't just put it back. They're all effective altruists. They all bought into this idea from some ridiculous Oxford grifter philosopher that you will do more total good, making as much money as you can in whatever way you want, and then put money back into charity when you're done. That's the most ends justifies the means piece of shit I've ever heard. No. The way you are in the moment is the way you are. If you're not doing the thing in the moment, you're not doing it. That's a hard one. In Calvinist America, Horatio Alger, we've got this so deep in our system that you do this for that. You do this for that. No.
You just do it.
You just do it. Yeah.
Perhaps a question that's really most poignant here is like, where do you get your hope from? Because I see you as a hopeful guy. I always have. I think your spirit reeks of hope.
The most profound experience I probably ever had was sitting with my mother-in-law as she died. And I was alone in the hotel room with her at like 2 a.m, thinking originally, why am I the one who's here? She's got these 3 kids, and that one's over there, this one's over there. And, I don't think she's conscious or what anymore. She was already doing the weird breathing thing. And I put my hand on her hand and touched her. And then I thought, oh, this is the most profound mitzvah I can be allowed to do.
Privilege.
Right. This is the most privileged thing, that I'm here helping someone cross. There's nothing I can say. There's nothing I can do. I can just be present. I'm just here. My organism is here with that one. What gave me hope is that when I was in Germany giving a kind of a happy Team Humanish talk, and someone got up and said, "What? You sound like you're playing in the orchestra on the deck of the Titanic as it sinks." And I paused and thought a minute, and I said, what more beautiful thing could you do on this planet than play in the orchestra on the deck of the Titanic as it goes down? My God.
Even if it's the last day on Earth, plant a tree.
Fuck yeah. And that's where I get my hope. And in that hope is infinity. In that hope, I'm not saying it doesn't matter how long the world lasts, but when we're in that space, you are in an infinity of time, and we can be there together.
Here's Minna. She teaches science.
Connection required. Our bodies are wired for successful connections, which present positive rewards. A study examining the effects of eye contact on the brain revealed that when participants make eye contact, there is a synchronized activation in specific brain regions. These areas predict the sensory consequences of another's actions and allow us to recognize shared emotions. This synchronization enhances empathy by preparing our brains to connect and understand the other person's emotions more deeply. Another study showed that eye contact is a fundamental component of empathy and social connection. This study noted that people who maintain eye contact tend to exhibit deeper empathic responses. This effect is partly due to what's called the empathic gaze, where individuals seek emotional cues from the eyes of the other person, furthering enhancing their empathic capacity.
To bring a visceral and embodied perspective to the subject, I sat with Brandon Crazen-Maddox, a choreographer, acrobat, and American Sign Language artist and interpreter, to learn about their experience of connection. While grandmas were quickly adapting to Zoom to chat with their grandkids during the pandemic, Brandon was challenged to bring an immersive 3D visual experience to the 2D media sphere.
One of our missions for Up Until Now Collective, which is our company, is to connect. It's making stories that focus on intimacy, empathy, and connection. And Up Until Now Collective was established in 2020 during the height of the pandemic, and when all we wanted to do but we could not do was connect with each other. And we were forced to do it in a virtual way, using a 3-dimensional language in a 2-dimensional landscape like an iPhone or like on Zoom was really tough. It was tough. And making art that is supposed to be 3-dimensional and on stage and having to reduce it to a 2-dimensional landscape.
How often do we have the chance to see the world through another's lens? Being a co-navigator for deaf-blind people and a translator for deaf people, Brandon has experiences that give them greater access to empathy.
Jumping into situations that are not my personal situation, and also allowing people's spirits who are going through something or who need some kind of information, whether it's education or just facilitation of communication or medical information or what have you, but letting their spirit into my body and representing their words as accurately and as close to the spirit of the message as possible, that has given me so much empathy, because I've been able to look at the world through someone else's lens, and also by getting to know that person. And that vicarious knowledge that I have been able to personally gain as an interpreter has been immense.
As a choreographer, Brandon was able to expand upon existing language. In this clip, we hear how they combined choreography and American Sign Language to interpret music in a fresh new way.
I just did some work with an artist named Jerome Ellis. He is a Black man who has a stutter. He plays a saxophone, he's a singer, and he's a poet, and he's phenomenal. So he invited me to be the ASL artist for his 3-day performance on the High Line in New York City. And so one thing he told me, which was so impactful, was, you know, Brandon, I envision the music that comes out of my saxophone as a bird flying through the woods. And I was like, oh, that's beautiful. So there were elements of his performance where he only played saxophone and there were no lyrics. And I interpreted those things. And so when he played those notes, my hands became the bird that was then flying through the forest, and the forest being the people who are listening, and the trees and the flowers and everything that music permeates. But it was fascinating to think about music in a 3-dimensional way. When the pitch went up, or the dynamics were larger, or when they were smaller and quiet and sensitive, what do the bird's wings do in space?
The brain determines trust. The prefrontal cortex assesses potential risks and benefits of trusting someone. In the words of Robert Sapolsky, the prefrontal cortex makes us do the hard thing when it's the right thing to do. The anterior cingulate cortex helps us detect potential conflicts and processes social pain. Its activation indicates an internal conflict or discomfort when encountering someone you dislike. It also helps us regulate our emotional responses. That gut feeling of distrust is likely the work of the insular cortex, which is involved in processing feelings of disgust and aversion, and can be triggered when someone is perceived as untrustworthy. Chemistry rewards and warns. Positive social interactions can affect the release of serotonin and dopamine, which affect mood regulation and feelings of happiness. Learning is a change in behavior due to experience. Dopamine, a prediction error signal, is a way we learn to modify future behavior to maximize the likelihood of desirable outcomes and minimize fruitless pursuits. Dopamine's release depends on your expectations. If there is a positive mismatch between your expectation and the outcome, you get release of dopamine. If you're driving with a broken taillight and get pulled over, you might expect to get a ticket. But maybe, if you're really lucky, you might get off with a warning. So if you get the warning, You get a little hit of dopamine. You expected a ticket, but got a warning, something you'd considered lucky and improbable. The expectation is probably more important than the reward itself. When mistrust is present in a connection, the expected positive outcome of trust is diminished, which leads to a reduced dopamine release. Oxytocin is often called the love hormone, but it also acts as a neurotransmitter. Behaviors like physical touch in an intimate relationship can trigger the release of oxytocin. Experiments show that release of oxytocin increases bonding and social trust. Oxytocin can enhance bonding and cooperation within a group, but this can lead to increased favoritism and preferential treatment of in-group members. So while oxytocin can reduce stress in positive social contexts, it can exacerbate stress and anxiety in negative social contexts. But when oxytocin is produced by the brain in the context of real love, we are capable of exhibiting astonishing levels of unselfish behaviors. There is almost nothing we wouldn't do to nurture and protect those we love.
Well, Wendy, that gives us a lot to consider. You know, we used Doug's wording to name the show for the subtitle, The Human Difference.
Doug is a great coiner of phrases. I've learned that about him.
Yes, he is. Embedded in that is the idea that technology can provide us with a lot, but there are certain things that we get from actual human-to-human connection that cannot be replaced by technology. Both Doug and Minna made this clear. Human connection is not just a desire, it's a need.
You know, I have a story, as you know, that relates to this. I was in a cast, a hard cast from my ankles to my neck as an infant. For 2 years, I was in that cast.
Wow.
And I'm pretty sure, you know, it's speculative, but I'm pretty sure that that's behind a really big drive I have for physical connection. I respond to physical connection emotionally. A good, authentic hug causes me to weep. And I feel the chemicals that Minna described, you know, oxytocin and dopamine. I get really high. And that's really what drew me to Brandon for this show. I'm very attracted to anything having to do with the body. And dance and American Sign Language have always had my attention as forms of connection because they are embodied. And Brandon's work is really innovating that ground. They're creating new ways to bring the body further into the field of connection and doing it very beautifully.
Yeah, I think we can safely say that need drives our behavior. So, you know, we're always trying to create these new ways to make connections happen. But what Doug revealed is how these technologies can actually thwart this effort. All those evolutionary cues that he talked about that foster trust between human to human, he points out that these are hidden by the digital medium. He also points out that there always seems to be an owner class that controls the current medium, and that's one level ahead of the rest of us.
Yeah, so we have that weird combo of like, it feels fake, and then we don't really have control of this thing. And, you know, we always wind up here, right? It's freaking capitalism.
Yeah, darn. Well, it's kind of like what they say about democracy. I think it was Churchill that said, democracy is the worst form of government except for all the rest.
That's right.
I kind of feel like we were like that way with capitalism.
That's funny. Yeah, well, you know, so here we are. You know, the billionaires own it and they get to control the tech and they write the algorithms. So there we are again, you know, one class away from getting this thing we're seeking out. Well, Minna and Doug both spoke to these pitfalls, you know, of our newest effort to connect with technology. You know, our nervous system detects the fake. It triggers fight flight. We produce cortisol, the stress hormone. And this is really problematic because we're seeking something really important.
We definitely lose something when we try to replace that person-to-person connection with a digital one.
I mean, look at incels, right?
Oh, wow.
These, involuntary celibates that are carrying dangerous resentment. And they're the result of connectivity that's only online. It's not balanced with person to person.
I like the way that Scott Galloway from the Pivot podcast talks about this, reminding us that this population of young men, we're kind of prone to not give young men help because men have the historic advantage, but he's reminding us that this population does need our support.
Yeah, I can't disagree.
And the pandemic brought that forward for us all, right? Because we were suddenly isolated and we got to feel what that feels like. And I have to say, starting out as a person that does have a little bit of social anxiety to begin with, you lock me in a house for a while and I start to atrophy. I mean, when I'm out practicing and I'm socializing, I keep that sharp. But boy, I really felt the atrophy when I tried to re-enter after the pandemic.
Yeah, I know you did. I think it was a little tough for me, but easier because I'm social by nature. That's my battery. So I think it was a little easier for me.
For sure. We also have to remind ourselves that there are upsides to these technologies. Look at Neuralink. Amazing. Earlier this year, Noland Arbaugh, a 30-year-old man who became paraplegic as a result of a swimming accident, became the first person to receive a brain implant chip, allowing him to control his computer with his mind.
It's totally insane that I am alive to see this. Whoa. Another thing comes to mind. You and I both read the book Life 3.0, Being Human in the Age of Artificial Intelligence. And Max Tegmark's book posits that the next media in the timeline Doug gave us in that narrative of like, first we get the Pharaoh, and then we get the written word, and then the printing press, and then the TV, and then the web. The book posits that the next in that is the actual upload, which is similar to Ray Kurzweil's idea of the singularity. And it's funny because if we stay on this track of like, it's all about connection, we create all this just to connect, the upload would be like the ultimate connection. We would not any longer be a bunch of separate, fleshy, embodied selves. We would become a single digital entity, like ultimate connection.
That's a fun notion to entertain. But I think, in the meantime, there's nothing really in our way of connecting human to human, but we do have to choose it. I liked when Doug said, hugs are free.
Yeah, I did too. And, Doug also reminded us that awe and wonder, which are like felt responses to the natural world, are different than gee whiz, which we feel when we are dazzled by the digital world. But our wiring, as Minna really shared, is natural for awe and wonder. Our neural networks and our chemistry know how to do that.
Yeah.
It's interesting to apply Guyon's words, right? So now we're kind of in that mystic realm, right? We played a clip of that up at the front where he says that what we call love is really the pull of evolution, which is always trying to draw itself together. And I think it's interesting how this show shows that could be true on both of the paths here. So like the human difference is driven by love to connect, without which there'd be no peace between people, right? We couldn't survive here together. We wouldn't reproduce, right? Love draws us together. But also, if we go to the extreme, the book 3.0, which posits that we're going to upload, it demonstrates that the same drive to connect births a digital format to which we may evolve into as a species, replacing Homo sapiens, but it would still be driven by the drive to connect, just different outcomes.
Right. And I can certainly entertain the notion of the digital upload, the singularity. But I have to say, I'm pro-analog. I'm putting my stake in the ground for Team Human.
Yeah, I could fathom the upload as a possible next evolutionary step. And some part of me is kind of super intrigued. But I'm also like, I'm human right this minute, and I want to be human all the way, which means I want to feel, I want to connect, I want lots of hugs.
Lots of hugs.
Lots.
That's great. Well, Wendy, great interview and great show. And let's close with a quote from this human, Maya Angelou, who points to the human difference. She says, I've learned that people will forget what you said. People will forget what you did, but people will never forget how you made them feel.
I'm purring. Good show, Rob.
All right. Thanks for listening, folks. Keep an eye out for the 15th anniversary release of Doug Rushkoff's popular book, Program or Be Programmed, coming out October 4th on OR Books. Also watch for a work created by Brandon Crazen-Maddox. The Up Until Now Collective develops and produces interdisciplinary work that explores empathy, intimacy, and connection. And thanks, as always, to our Knowing podcast scientist, Mina Levitz. We are always delighted to receive feedback from our listeners. Email knowingpodcast@gmail.com and stay connected on Substack. Knowing is written, produced, and hosted by Wendy Tremaine and myself, Rob Stroop. Original music and sound design also by Rob Stroop. Recorded and produced at Taproot Studio, Truth or Consequences, New Mexico. Knowing is a production of Chapter 24 Media. Thanks for listening.